Have you ever really stopped to think about what truly drives us as human beings? Today, we're diving into a really powerful idea from the book, The Worm at the Core. It suggests that so much of our history, our culture, and even our conflicts can be traced back to one single hidden fear. So, let's start with this quote from the philosopher William James. It's pretty profound. He gave us this incredible metaphor over a century ago, the worm at the core. And what is that worm? Well, it's the knowledge that we're going to die. It's an awareness that, as the cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker later argued, just gnaws away at the very foundation of what it means to be human.
Yeah, think about it. Building pyramids, going to war, falling in love, buying a fancy car. On the surface, what on earth could they possibly have in common? They seem completely unrelated, right? An ancient wonder, a brutal act of violence, a modern status symbol. But what if they're all just different ways we try to solve the exact same problem? To really get that connection, we have to start with the fundamental problem itself, the one that Ernest Becker really zeroed in on.
And here it is. This is the human paradox. We are these brilliant, self-aware animals who know for a fact that one day we're gonna die. No other animal on Earth has to deal with this. That amazing intelligence of ours, it comes with this heavy price. And that awareness, this unique burden, it creates this potential for just an overwhelming, paralyzing terror. Okay, so if we know we're gonna die, how do we get out of bed in the morning? How are we not just paralyzed by fear all the time? Well, as a species, we've come up with this really ingenious psychological shield to protect ourselves. And this shield is the whole idea behind something called terror management theory, or TMT. This is the central concept from our source material today. And it basically says that a huge amount of what we do, what we think, what we believe, it's all just this really elaborate defense mechanism against our anxiety about death. So how does this shield actually work? Well, the theory says it has two main parts, two pillars really. First up is our cultural worldview. This is the shared story we all buy into, things like religion or patriotism. It gives life meaning, it gives it order, and it promises us that in some way we're gonna live on, either literally or, symbolically. And the second pillar, that's self-esteem. This is the feeling that you are a valuable person playing a meaningful part in that world. You put those two together and they keep that terror, that worm at the core buried deep down. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's a cool idea, but is it real? Well, this isn't just some philosophical musing. The authors back this up with over 500 experiments, and they show these effects in some pretty fascinating and honestly kind of startling ways. Okay, let's look at one of the first studies they did. Researchers went to a group of actual municipal court judges and gave them a pretty standard case file. Their job was simple, just set the bail for an alleged prostitute. And normally, the bond for that kind of thing? About $50. But here's the twist. Before they did that, half of the judges were asked to do something that seemed totally unrelated. They just had to take a moment and briefly write about their own death as part of a personality questionnaire. So how could this tiny little reminder possibly change a professional legal decision? You'd think it wouldn't, right?
Well, the result was absolutely shocking. The control group, the judges who didn't think about death, they set the bail right around that normal $50 mark. But the judges who had just been reminded of their own mortality, they set the bail at an average of $455. That's over 9 times higher. And the wildest part, they had no conscious idea that that little questionnaire had influenced them at all.
So what does this tell us? It shows that when our mortality is brought to mind, even subtly, we cling way more tightly to our cultural worldview. It's our shield, right? To them, the alleged prostitute represented a violation of their moral and legal values. So to protect that worldview, and by extension themselves, they subconsciously punished her way more severely. And it's not just about punishment. This same deep down drive shapes what we buy. In another study, after a death reminder, people's interest in a practical car didn't really change, but their desire for a luxury car, a Lexus, it shot through the roof. And why is that? Because status symbols boost our self-esteem. That's the other pillar, remember? They make us feel more important, more significant, more symbolically immortal. Okay, So it's not just about punishing people or buying stuff. This goes even deeper. It affects how we treat the sacred symbols that hold up our entire worldview. This experiment is just brilliant. They got a group of Christian participants and gave them a pretty weird task: use a small crucifix to hammer a nail. Now, when they thought about something ordinary first, they did it pretty quickly, in about 3 minutes. But after they were reminded of death, it took them over twice as long, and they reported feeling way more stress. Using that sacred symbol for something so mundane felt wrong. It felt like sacrilege, a direct threat to the very worldview that was protecting them. So you can see how powerful this is. But here's the really crucial point. This psychological shield, as much as we might need it, has a very real dark side. Because the exact same mechanism that pushes us to create art and build monuments, it can also fuel our absolute worst behaviors. Let's look at the hot sauce study. Participants were asked to give hot sauce to someone who they knew hated spicy food. When that person shared their political views, it made no real difference. But after a death reminder, participants gave them more than twice the amount of painfully hot sauce if they had opposing political beliefs. The defense of their worldview escalated from simple judgment to an actual desire to inflict physical harm. And this effect scales up in some really scary ways. Hundreds of studies confirm this pattern. When you subtly remind people of death, they become more prejudiced against immigrants, they're more likely to support preemptive military strikes that would kill civilians, more tolerant of torture, and more supportive of violence against anyone who holds different beliefs. According to the source, this is where leaders can tap into these deep-seated fears, especially during a crisis. In the aftermath of 9/11, when mortality was incredibly present for all Americans, the conflict was framed as a cosmic battle of good versus evil. This explains the powerful appeal of charismatic leaders in troubled times. When our worldview is threatened and death feels near, we seek out a confident hero, someone who promises to restore order, vanquish evil, and offer us a heroic role in a cause that will outlive us. It's a promise of a symbolic victory over death itself, which brings us to the final, really challenging question the book leaves us with. If the very same urge to transcend death drives both our greatest achievements and our most destructive violence, how do we choose? How do we find what the book calls a life-enhancing illusion that builds a better world rather than one that just tears it apart?